Okay, so as we kind of continue in looking at how things are changing within the Catholic, meaning universal church, I wanted to talk about, well, another thing that's happening is that since Christianity is growing and spreading and people are being more exposed to it, you've got, well, I guess I don't need to write it, this idea of people saying, okay, what's the best way to apply this? Should we, as we look at the scriptures, how then shall we live? And some people are beginning to choose to live solo, this idea of mono, a monk, monasticism, sort of saying, okay, I'll live to fully devote my life to God. I will live away from society, in a place by myself where I can concentrate only on my faith. And so this is another thing that starts to happen during the Middle Ages. Here, the early Middle Ages, as we get into it, is the monks who are here. And so really starting before Rome falls, with Saint Anthony. So this guy lives somewhere around the years 250 to 350. And he is historically viewed as the first monk. So this idea of living mono by himself. He goes to the desert in Egypt, and he relies on people who live relatively nearby, because you're in a desert, to provide him with supplies and things like that. But this idea that, and when we start to get into artwork also, again, these things are done later, but this idea of the halo extending around someone's head, the idea that they're a holy person, a saint set apart in the church and recognized by the Catholic Church as a saint. So Anthony goes out in the Egyptian desert, and that kind of sets a trend where other people say, hey, that's a neat idea, a neat way to devote my life completely to God and not have any other distractions in my life. And so, ironically, the desert kind of starts to become crowded with other people doing this. Then there are other people saying, okay, what are other ways where I can show my complete devotion to God? And just a kind of an entertaining example to me always is this guy named Simeon, the Stylite. Simeon lived on a pillar for over 30 years. Okay, so he goes to this pillar. He's on a couple of different pillars, but he says, okay, this is the way to devote my life to God, is I'll live here on this big, tall column with a little platform on the top. And he spends over 30 years in what's now in Syria, on this pillar. He relies on kids to bring him food, and these local boys will raise food up with a little kind of pulley system, I guess. I've never wanted to look into the historical details of how he used the bathroom during this time on top of a pillar. But it's this idea of people saying, what are ways where we can completely devote our life to God and not have these worldly distractions? You're also starting to see the beginnings of asceticism, which would be as a means of sort of this kind of, well, it's not just self-discipline, it's more of a refraining abstinence from things that you enjoy, the ascetics are going to get into some harsh things, like thinking they deserve physical punishment, they don't deserve luxurious comforts. So we're going to have a lot of people who become ascetic. So the adjective for that would be ascetic. So these ascetic people, someone like Simeon saying, okay, well, I need to go live on top of a pillar for 30-something years to that harsh kind of self-discipline to refrain from comforts that he has there. So Simeon is another example. So what happens then is that some people start to process that you don't really need to live all by yourself to be a monk. Yes, it's this idea of living a life devoted to God, but you can be monks living together in a community. Okay, you would have silent times and times of prayer, your own room, your own chamber. You're cultivating your own faith, but you can actually live together. And this guy named Saint Benedict with the massive feet. Again, the stained glass would have been done later, but the feet made me laugh. Saint Benedict was one who sort of puts this idea together of saying, okay, he has very strict rules, but monks can live together. And this is more of what we think of with monks today, instead of just a random person hanging out on a pole or in a desert, living together in monasteries, sometimes abbeys, but where these monks will go live. So monks living in monasteries, so these are for men. So the community it's for men alone. We'll get later to the female equivalent convents, but this idea for men to go become monks and live in that community and environment. And monks are going to be still have a lot of monasteries. It's bad that groups like ISIS have been destroying a lot of them in the Middle East. But we get here's a illuminated manuscript of some monks in the Middle Ages. One of the things that probably associate them, or even if you've seen Robin Hood or things like that, is the haircut. The haircut is known as a tonsure. Two kind of stories of the origin of that little haircut oops, I was going to erase it. One is that they it's sort of symbolic as a reminder of the crown of thorns that Jesus wore at his crucifixion. The other, that it's just a symbol of reverence to God. But these monks, for those of you who like sports, Tim Tebow is a commentator. I think he still plays baseball for the Mets now, but he had been a really successful quarterback at the University of Florida, and is very outspoken about his Christian faith. So when he was drafted a number of years ago by, he's normally an incredibly good-looking guy. Hello, Tim. I have a thing for Tim, even though he went to Florida and I went to Alabama. They gave him that gross haircut as his rookie hazing for the Denver Broncos when he was playing for them. Just this idea of being holy and spiritual, with that haircut being associated with the monks. So the other big thing that the monks are doing, which is why they're important, is because they know how to read and write. So whereas other people aren't doing that as well, monks are going to be super, super important for, because we don't have a printing press. We're a long way from that in the 1400s when that develops. So one of the things that they did was copied, well, some of them are going to be copies of copies, but a lot of the reasons why we have ancient sources from Rome and Greece and things like that is because monks were copying those. So monks were going to be very important since they knew how to read and write, whereas a lot of other people are going to forget how to do that. So monks are super important. It is even in South Carolina. A lot of people don't realize this. But let me abort from here and go back to show you on Google Earth. We've got a monastery. Well, an abbey. Where did Google go? Down by Monk's Corner. There's a male monks living there on a beautiful piece of property known as Mepkin Abbey on the Ashley River, so not terribly far from Charleston. And let's see, oops, no, that's not how I do it. I don't know if it's going to give you a picture of a road here or not. Oh, foodie, somebody's got to have a gonna have to look this way. I'm gonna go down the road. But you can go to Mepkin Abbey, and so again, just a beautiful spot on the Ashley River. There are azaleas blooming, what's that moss? Spanish moss growing on the trees, and there you see the monks there at the monastery. So these men are there, and they live there. You'll see signs around that say be quiet and things like that. I guess you can hire it out for weddings. Monks don't get married, but other people can. So a beautiful piece of property, and interesting to go and walk around down there. And you can actually, I'm sure you guys would be, let's see, how to become a monk. So it sort of shows the time. So, I mean, they're getting up at 3. It's tough to be a monk. So they're saying prayers and things like that at different times. There's a way to say, I think on here, how to become a monk. Becoming a monk, there you go. So, it's still interesting kind of how you can do that, knowing the monastic way, no wife, children, parents to take care of, no financial debt. So still becoming a monk, can live down there, but they obviously had an important role. Belmont Abbey, so if you go to Charlotte, I almost got a paper cut just now on my calendar on my desk, just so you know. Belmont Abbey, a college just right there off of I-85 on the way into Charlotte, is also a really pretty campus. There's Charlotte in the background, but you've got a monastery there on campus, and monks who are living there on Belmont Abbey's campus. It's Catholic university, so you can still, we've got several of these things within a couple of hours, or at least 2 of these places within a couple of hours of where we live, and those things are based on the Benedictine monasteries. So important stuff that's still in our geographic area today, and we have a lot of our ancient texts from what was going on with them. The Bible that they are using at this point in the Middle Ages, this becomes key too, because it's called the Vulgate. So the Vulgate is the Latin translation of the Bible. It was made, the years vary a little bit, but right around the year 400 is when it was published or produced. There was no printing press. So it was published around 400 AD, and I don't know why I decided to write that instead of type it. A Latin translation by a guy named St. Jerome. This is a big deal because the Bible's original language is not Latin. The Hebrew is the language for the Old Testament, the part of the Bible before the life of Jesus, the history of the Hebrews, the people of Israel. And then from Jesus forward is the New Testament, and that is written in Greek. So there are going to be some translation issues since it's put into a language that isn't original. But this is the only legal translation of the Bible in the Catholic Church for hundreds of years. So that's going to become a big deal, because as more people lose the ability to read and write, Latin is not... Smart people are going to continue to know Latin, but again, you can't look up a Bible on an app on your phone. You can't go buy one at Walmart or a bookstore. So people are living out in the middle of nowhere and part of the Catholic Church, and you're just having to trust what is said instead of being able to go to the source itself. So that's going to become a big deal, and Christianity is going to become very complicated later during the Middle Ages. But let's stop it there. Again, bye.